Okay, so I am Robert St. George. If you haven't met me already, I know I've met a number of you. I am the graduate student career advisor for the School of Public Affairs, something I've been doing um, since about 2012, I think, something like that. So closing in on 10 years doing that. I've been with AU overall since 2008 and spent much of my life abroad doing mostly advocacy campaigning for the United Nations, and also actually earlier for a number of big nonprofit organizations like World Wildlife Fund at their international headquarters in Geneva. Anyhow, enough about me. You can go to the american.edu/career center and find my bio there, along with the bios of a lot of other career advisors. What we're going to do this evening is give you an introduction to the Career Center and also give you kind of a lot of quick advice on internship and job searching in DC. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about what the Career Center does for you. I know that a number of you probably came from, not necessarily immediately this past spring, but perhaps a few years ago, smaller schools, possibly in small towns or even rural areas, where the Career Center might have been, not that much of a presence on campus. At AU, that's quite different. We strongly recognize that we're in Washington, D.C., and that's important. And we want to help launch people to the maximum degree possible successfully in their careers, or if you're already in a career and you're getting a graduate degree to advance in your career, to help you do that. I do want to emphasize, while overwhelmingly our students and our recent alumni are looking to be in Washington, D.C., there are also people who are not looking to do that, and we can also provide support for you all too. So just to kind of skim these bullet points that I've got on this slide, and I'm not going to read all of them. There's going to be a career services orientation where I will try not to cover too much overlap in August, probably the week before the semester starts. Don't know whether that's going to be in person or not, although I am returning to campus on a 2-day-a-week basis starting, I believe, August 16th, something like that. I'm not sure about that exact date. Individual advising appointments we do throughout the calendar year, and I want to emphasize that I'm not faculty, so I don't disappear in the summertime. I do occasionally take some days off, but I'm here during the summer. So if you want to start talking to me soon, you can do that. You can make appointments with me. What kinds of things do I in particular do with people? I have a process and a document in which we can do jointly a career path planning self-assessment for you to kind of figure out where you are career-wise and what you need to do to advance in your career. It involves downloading a document, filling it out, sending it to me at least a couple of days ahead of time so I can squeeze in some time to look at it carefully, and then we would do a 60-minute appointment and go through it step by step. More on that later. I also do a lot of interview preparation and mock interviews with people, particularly since the pandemic began. I would say these days, it's 15 to 20% of my advising. And I will say immodestly, I've got a lot of experience doing interviews. I was a senior executive for a long time, probably interviewed 500 people for jobs. And since I've come to AU, I've probably done mock interviews, 3,000 times. It's a wild estimate, but a lot, okay? We also provide, I'm going to show you this in a few minutes, a career resources site that is available 24/7 to you with a lot of documents, employers lists, and a lot of other things on it. It's on Canvas, which, as you may know, is what AU has used to replace Blackboard. And I'm going to give you a live little bit of a demonstration of that. We do a lot of career skills workshops, not just me, but a lot of the career advisors jointly, and we're going to talk about the schedule that's upcoming this summer on those career skills workshops. I'm also the lead advisor for AU campus-wide as the coach of people who want to be candidates for presidential management fellowships. Those are post-graduation fellowships, I want to emphasize, and you are not eligible to apply until October of your second year of grad school. Okay, a little bit more on that in a moment. Again, what kinds of more general help do we do? Help with federal job searching, or any kind of job searching for that matter, but in particular federal jobs, pathways internships, which are paid federal internships. I talk a lot to people about job and internship search strategies. Some people want a critique of their resume or cover letter. We can do that too. The happy situation of salary negotiations, I can provide some advice on. And a lot of other things involving networking, informational interviewing, following up with employers with whom you've already interviewed. For those of you who are making a career transition, which I arbitrarily define as someone who's been doing something for about 3 years and wants to make a big break. You're a high school teacher and you don't want to do that anymore. You want to be a policy analyst in the nonprofit sector or with the federal government or something like that. That's a career transition, and I've got documents, and I specialize to some degree in doing that. By the way, I forgot to mention at the beginning, ask me a question at any point. You are muted, and the reason for that is I've learned the hard way that if everybody's microphones were open, we would be listening to ambulances going by people's houses and dogs barking, and some people do the dishes while they're watching webinars, I've found out. So ask questions by using the Q&A or the chat function, and I'll keep an eye on it as I go through the presentation. If I move on to a new slide and your question was about the previous slide, just ask the question anyway and I'll go back, all right? No problem with that. So let's keep going. This is a screen capture of our Twitter account, which is a pretty valuable resource. It's a private account. It's only open to AU students and recent alumni. The reason why it's a private account is to keep primarily to keep a lot of Georgetown and George Washington University students out of it, all right? They don't have anything like this. I tweet these days about 350 jobs and internships per month, okay? That's a lot. And by the way, one of you asked about how do you schedule an individual session. I'll be getting to that later in the presentation, okay? These are jobs and internships that are relevant to people in the School of Public Affairs, primarily relevant to graduate students, although there are undergrads who follow this, and so not all of it. There are some unpaid internships that graduate students might not be interested in. But this is a big resource because it narrows the field down to the kind of things that people in the School of Public Affairs or those who have recently graduated are interested in. And it's a lot of information, okay? Occupies a lot of my time to produce it. Someone says, if you don't have Twitter, is there a way to get access? No, you've got to open a Twitter account. I mean, it's not a hassle, believe me. It'll take you about 60 seconds to open a Twitter account. You don't have to put Twitter on your phone. You don't have to tweet anything. You can just follow it, okay? You can be completely silent on Twitter if you're afraid of, having to engage with people who are abusive or whatever, which we know happens on Twitter. But that's the way to get this information, is to sign up for a Twitter account. Then you can, and what happens is, if you have not had experience with a private Twitter account, when you go to that address at @AU_SPA careers, it will say, basically, you can't see these tweets, more politely than that. And it'll say, click follow to request access. That will send me a direct message over Twitter, all right? If your Twitter handle does not resemble your name, you need to send me an email to tell me that you've requested access. Because when I don't know who is requesting access, I don't let them in, because that's the way that a lot of Georgetown and GW students try to get access, as well as people from other schools, by the way. And you know, they should have gone to AU if they wanted access to this. That's my attitude. So I'm gonna demonstrate this in a moment, but let me keep going here. This is a screenshot of the Canvas site, which doesn't really show you much, and I think I'm probably going to depart from this and give you a live demo, depart from the slides for a moment and give you a more of a live presentation of Twitter and the Canvas site. But I want to explain that it's divided up into a lot of folders. Okay, the thing that is the aspect, the content of it that is most popular among graduate students, and this is only open to graduate students, by the way, in SPA. The most popular content are employer lists, and I'm going to show you a list of those lists. People like to access it because, and it covers a lot of different sectors, and you'll see that in a moment. But let me depart from the slideshow for the moment. So I'm gonna hit escape and put this to the side, and let me do this, and let me expand it so that we're looking, so that you don't see much else on my screen. And so this is the Twitter account, okay, as seen from a browser, not from a phone, obviously. Right now, there are 1,796 people following it. Those are basically School of Public Affairs students and recent alumni. What do I tweet? It ranges from, at one end, unpaid internships. At the other end, it goes as high as jobs where employers want people to have a master's degree and a bit of experience. I don't tweet stuff for mid-career people. It's just too much work, and I mean, it would expand my responsibilities on this tremendously to do it. And then I'd be tweeting a lot of stuff that the vast bulk of the people looking at this would not be interested in. So I go up to jobs where employers are asking for up to 2 years experience in jobs, not talking about internships now, but jobs, and not any further than that, okay? If you're more experienced than that, this account might not be for you. But I had to, be fairly arbitrary in drawing the line somewhere. I hope you understand that. It's still, overwhelmingly very popular. And just to scroll a little bit through it, in fact, no, I don't actually. Let me go to view and try to make it a little bigger for you. And one more time. So now it's a bit bigger. I've pinned to the top this schedule of upcoming career webinars, and I'm going to go. I actually have a slide on that I'm going to show you a little later. But for example, if you know Twitter, these are the things that were most recently tweeted today. Okay, so and overwhelmingly the tweets come in the morning, typically by 11 o'clock, and generally, there might be one here or there that tweets in the afternoon, but basically they tweet between 10 and 11 a.m. The tweets run. And as you can see, anything that is a full-time job starts out with, as you see here, FT job, okay? Government relations consulting firm seeks alum or grad student for a legislative policy analyst, and there's the link. You click on the link and it takes you to the job description, okay? I'm not gonna start reading these tweets, by the way, but, and some of them have nice little graphics because the employer attached a graphic to their link. And in some cases, you don't see the link. Like this employer had it set up so that you don't see the link, but you would click here. This is the Center for the Study of Social Policy, looking for somebody with a master's degree with some experience to be a policy analyst. You just click on this image and that would take you to the job. Here's an internship. Notice it did not start out with FT job. This is Amnesty International, looking for a full-time grassroots legislative advocacy intern. They did not say whether or not it was a summer position. And I want you to understand, I don't have the time to start investigating this with every employer because I'm looking at literally hundreds of these things every week. So if you're interested and you're thinking, well, I can't do a full-time internship, it's too much. you'll need to find out if it's summertime. Maybe you can, if they're still actually recruiting for the summer right now. It's pretty late to get a summer internship. It's very late. I will tell you that right now is starting to be the time when most employers begin posting fall internships. Okay, so if you're looking for an internship for the fall, basically a lot of them have been posted starting about 2 weeks ago. I would get access to the Twitter account. I would go back 2 weeks in the timeline, see what's been posted, and then keep up with it every day. Okay, so this is how it is, and you just start scrolling down and down and down and down and down. By the way, I'm going to show you something just to show you the issue that I have with people who either are not identified as students at AU, or like, for example, follower request. You see, that's Alyssa. I have no idea who Alyssa is, so I'm not letting her in unless I know that she's a student. If you're Alyssa, send me a message here or send me an email and tell me. If you're Madam President, again, I'd love to let you in, but I have no idea who you are. And then, there's Kura the Explorer, and some of these people that have full names do not show up. By the way, I check people's names, if I don't know you already, with the registrar, AU registrar's database. And so, for example, this person's name does not come up in the AU registrar's database. So, so I didn't let her in yet. And so these are 8 people who are not in, either because I don't know their names or because their names don't show up on the registrar's database. Okay. And someone just said that they just now requested access. So I'm going to show you how this works, at least for me. It doesn't really matter. Wow, 20 follower requests. I'm going to accept all these and assume that these are all people who are following this webinar right now. So I'm accepting, Michael, and here we go. And so those of you who are, maybe if you didn't have your name on the Twitter handle, I'm going to just assume that these people who just showed up are all watching this webinar, all of you, and keep going. And I'm going to stop there. And that, by the way, just to refresh again, has put us over 1,800 followers. So we've reached a milestone. Thank you for those of you who have requested. If any of you, I'm not going to keep doing this because it gets a little boring for you. But that's how easy it is, okay? You request access, you get access, and boom, you're in, all right? And that's that. And you need to be logged into Twitter to do it. I would recommend, by the way, that you mostly access this account on a browser rather than on your phone, because you're not going to apply for a job on your phone, right? Maybe you want to do it just to check what's there, but ultimately you want to check this account on a browser and do it that way, and start looking for stuff that way. Okay, so let me go to Canvas, and there it is. Except it doesn't really look like that. Let me change a bit the way this looks. So you're going to be looking at it something like this, okay? And this is, when it comes up, it doesn't really look like that much. SPA, Graduate Student Career Resource Center, these are the various folders. Now, I have collapsed all the folders. I want to show you, when you click Expand All, then all of a sudden you see what's within these folders. So this is a whole bunch of fact sheets on applicant tracking systems, which is a way that employers put you in a database and filter you as a candidate for jobs, generally not for internships. I'm going to talk more about applicant tracking systems later in the presentation. It's a whole bunch of fact sheets on various aspects of interviewing, including, and let me put my glasses on here, case interviewing with management consulting firms, like Deloitte, for example, which I've put here. A list of civil rights employers. I'm not going to read everything that's on here, by the way, fear not. Whole bunch of information on consulting firms, mostly consulting firms, lobbying firms, government contractors, etc. This is a very long list. And just to show you what's inside, I'm going to click on this so you get a sense of what you got. This is a very long list of DC area lobbying firms and associations. It's divided into 3 categories. First thing you see are hired guns. And so there's a whole bunch of employers here that basically these are for-profit lobbying firms that work both sides of the fence, politically speaking, okay? And that's just about all lobbying firms in DC. Then there are associations. So, and this one I love, the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity. You can believe whether there's such a thing as clean coal or not. It's up to you. And then the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, that's big. That means, you know, General Motors and Toyota and Ford and probably Hyundai and other companies, okay? Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. So there's a lot of ideas here. By no means, by the way, am I guaranteeing they're all recruiting people for jobs or internships right now, but this will give you some idea of all of this. And these are all organizations that do a heavy amount of lobbying and advocacy for their business sectors, right? Then the final one, if I can get to it here, grassroots. Grassroots is not just progressive organizations. There are some conservative organizations that are grassroots here, and you'll see a whole bunch of them that do both progressive and conservative advocacy. So that's one example of what is available by clicking on one of these fact sheets. They're not all that long, I should emphasize. So for example, a lot of stuff on intelligence and national security, and I've broken that down into separate folders: CIA, DEA, DHS, DIA, FBI, National Geospatial, National Security Agency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? But for example, social justice, just to show you what this is a list I put together not that long ago. It's not nearly as long, of course, as the lobbying list, but it's a fair number of employers, probably what, about 40 here, in alphabetical order. I mean, I don't know what other way to, I don't want to start making arbitrary decisions about, well, this one's more important than that one. So you need to go through it if you want to figure that out. This has become a very popular fact sheet. A lot of people, of course, for obvious reasons, are very interested in social justice these days. So that's how you work Canvas. But in addition to the employer lists, which I've really focused on primarily, there are, for example, fact sheets on resumes and cover letters, how to use keywords in resumes, how to insert a professional skills profile in your resume, advice about choosing references. Here's some sample cover letters and what they might look like. Here's a guide to writing cover letters, so et cetera, okay? So there's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of content. And again, if you encounter it, if you get to it and everything is collapsed like this, remember that all you have to do is click on one of the folders and then you get all these various pieces of content about it, all right? It's a really good resource. You don't have access to it yet, however. I need to get a list from the SPA Office of Graduate Admissions, and all of you will receive what Canvas calls an invitation. Basically, it'll be an email that'll say, do you want to get access to the SPA Graduate Student Career Resources Center? You say yes, and you click on something where you confirm that you do want access to it, and then you will have access to this, okay? But you don't quite have it yet. Let me see if there's other issues. Oh, I see that Paloma actually is on this. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go back on this. I'll go back later and I'll get you in. I don't want to deal with this right now. So how do you get access to the Graduate Student Career Resource site? You're going to get an invitation once I get a list and I can get this all together. And then it has to go to technical people. I don't want to bore you with the details. And then you'll get an invitation to get into this site, hopefully fairly soon, okay? So that's the Twitter account. I want to look to make sure I didn't miss any okay, didn't miss anything else. So let's go back to the slide presentation. And that was just the screen capture. So let's go to the next one. Now, this is a list of the employer lists that you can find on the Canvas site. How did I come up with this list? I developed it since really about 2012 or 2011. I can't remember exactly when I started being career advisor for school public affairs. And I did it in response to requests from students saying, hey, you know, can you come up with a list of civil rights employers or national security nonprofits or opinion research consulting firms or healthcare policy research employers or think tanks? That's in DC. Excuse me. That's a big one for obvious reasons that people are interested in. And so, as you can see, there's a lot of, I add to the list all the time. Not every day, but these days, probably every couple months. If you are interested in a particular employment sector that you don't see listed here, let me know, and I will make an effort to set some time aside, because it does require some research to put these lists together, and go from there. Okay, so those are the employer lists, and I'm not one of these people who reads everything on a slide, so I don't want to bore you to death. So let's go to the next slide. There's a question here. I would love to see a list for LGBTQ. You know what? I'm pretty sure I have one. In fact, I know I have one. I'll have to double check to make sure I just actually put it together about a month ago. And I need to make sure it's on the Canvas site, okay? But if you'd like to receive it directly, by the way, send me an email directly. You can see my email in the chat, and if you don't see it in the chat, I'll be showing it at the end of this presentation. You can send me an email, and I'll send you that list directly. Okay. So Handshake, and pretty much all of you, except those of you who have enrolled in AU within the last couple of weeks. But everybody who enrolled by the end of May has access to Handshake now. If you don't know how to access it, what I suggest you do is to call the AU Career Center front desk, which is 202-885-1804. I'm going to type that in the 202-885-1804. Yeah. So I just put it in the chat. Now, they are not at the desk right now because they're not working on campus, but they are monitoring the voicemail of that phone number every, half an hour to an hour. So they will get back to you, and they can walk you through how to set up your Handshake account and get working on it. A lot of people seem to have been able to do it on their own, but if you can't, they're there to help you. I actually don't know how to help a student set up a Handshake account, so please don't ask me to do that. What is Handshake? It's kind of an AI type system in the sense that it works a bit like Amazon.com, although I don't want to overemphasize that too much. It's not nearly as sophisticated as Amazon. It's a system that does a lot of different things, including job postings that come directly from employers. What we do is we actually filter or vet employers who then can post directly onto Handshake. And something like 3,000 to 4,000 jobs and internships are posted by employers, jobs and internships, are posted directly by employers onto Handshake to AU students every year. And as you can see, that saves us as Career Center staff a lot of work of having to go through everything somebody wants to post. Someone mentions, if your previous school had Handshake and your account is active, do you need to make a brand new account? The issue is there I don't know whether you will be able to get into there are other things on Handshake, as you may know, if you've been using it at another school. There's an events function where you can register for upcoming events of various kinds, most of them career related. There's also an automated interview function that you can use, which I'm going to explain all this later. I'm not sure whether you will get access to all the things that AU offers on Handshake if you're using an account from another school. You can see whether you can and go from there. And I'm also not sure that when employers post up on Handshake, they don't necessarily post it to every university in the country. So I'm not sure whether you'll be able to actually see the jobs and internships that are posted for AU students. So that's a lot of ifs, right? And you may well, and the other thing is, if there are jobs or internships you want to apply for via Handshake, because you see them and you want to, and the employer wants you to apply using the Handshake system, then you're going to have a problem. It's going to say you're attending another school and not AU. Okay. And if you're applying with a DC employer and you attended a school that is not in the DC area, quite candidly, the employer is a lot less likely to hire you if you're outside, if they think you're outside the DC area. More on that in a moment. What else is on Handshake? I'm going to explain this in a little bit. You can access something called Alumni Fire that helps you network with AU alumni who have actually volunteered to help AU students. Okay. There's something called Big Interview. You can self-record interviews. It offers you menus of questions that you could be asked for different types of interviews. You stare at a webcam and you record the interview. You should understand, by the way, that Handshake uses artificial intelligence over time to predict jobs and internships and career events that might be relevant to you. Although I would not passively wait for Handshake to do that for you. Obviously, you want to be proactive. So that's Handshake. Any other questions about that? I don't see any. This is Alumni Fire, which you can access via Handshake. And on the left side navigation on the homepage of Handshake, you will see something called Resources. You click on that, and then you'll see Alumni Fire. Okay. What is Alumni Fire? More than 3,000 currently AU alumni have volunteered to help current students find jobs and internships. Not necessarily at their own employer, that may or may not be possible for them, but they're there to give advice. You can filter it by, are they alumni of the School of Public Affairs or not? There's various ways in which you can filter it. Now, as you might imagine, alumni don't want to volunteer, make an open-ended offer to volunteer and then end up with 25 students in a month asking for help. So the way it generally works is alumni, especially if they're working at a really popular employer, a place like Deloitte Consulting, they will limit the number of students they will deal with in a month to, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5. And then at the end of the month, you're finished up with that employer, and 3 or 4 or 5 new people can come in and work with that employer. It usually is not that much of a problem, okay? But just wanted you to understand the limitations that people, understandably, alumni put on using this, okay? So that's it, Alumni Fire. Now, you can also access alumni via LinkedIn's database of AU alumni. That is the link at the top. You may want to, if you can copy it or if you could just type it. This will give you access to a database. Essentially, what is a database of what is now close to 115,000 AU alumni. All right, that's for people who graduated between the year 1900 and 2021. All right. And you can filter this down in a number of different ways. You can start immediately by just going in the search field and saying, okay, I want to find people who AU alumni who work for the Sierra Club, okay, or who work for a particular government contractor, or and by the way, if you want to go into national security and intelligence, generally those alumni are not on LinkedIn. In fact, CIA people, they go off the grid. Okay, you get a job at CIA or NSA or DIA, you're almost certainly not on LinkedIn. So you can try looking for AU alumni there, and maybe you might find 1 or 2, but mostly you won't. They're pretty much told not to be advertising the fact that they're working for an intelligence agency on LinkedIn or other social media. But you'll find a lot of other people working for a lot of other agencies of the federal government and a lot of other places, okay? You can filter it by what people do. Are they in business development or education or media or community social services, etc.? You can filter it down by what they studied, although I should tell you that I have found over the years that basically a lot of our alumni end up in career paths that you would not have predicted given given what they studied, particularly as undergrads. Grad school is a bit different. There tends to be more of a direct relationship. Okay. So that's the LinkedIn alumni database. And that's the address, linkedin.com/school/American-university/people. Okay. Now, let's talk about events. We do a lot of events here. We've been doing them all as webinars since March of 2020, and we're likely to continue doing webinars rather than doing in-person workshops. Not so much because we're concerned about COVID, but because it just gives people a lot easier access to these sessions. What kind of career focus events do we do at AU? There are on-campus, there is right now on-campus, or not right now, but there will be in the fall, on-campus virtual recruiting by employers, both in the spring and fall semesters. Generally, they don't do it in the summer. There's something we call employer in residence sessions, which helps bring students together with employers, again, throughout the spring and fall. The employers don't actually live on campus, but they spend a lot of time, talking to AU students. Then there are employer information sessions, which probably most of you are familiar with. And there are dozens of these throughout the spring and fall, where employers will come in, give information. And typically, by the way, we try to get employers to send alumni. Okay. It doesn't always work that way, but we try to get them to send alumni, because I think we believe it's much more relevant and interesting for you to hear about alumni who are working for particular employers that you might be interested in. Okay. And what is an information session? The employer will make a presentation, we'll answer a lot of questions. That's kind of how that goes. Now, I've got down here the AU Job and Internship Fair in spring and fall. Actually, last year, I think we did 4 virtual internship fairs. We don't know yet whether we're going to return to an in-person job and internship fair. When we had them pre-pandemic, we had upwards of 160 employers in the AU basketball arena, set up as kind of a big sort of convention hall, okay? And as many as 1,500 students would show up for a 3-hour job and internship fair. And these were all with employers who are actually recruiting people for jobs and internships, okay? The virtual internship fairs we did, worked moderately well. They're not quite as good as the in-person thing. Although we had upwards of 60 to 70 employers at each of our virtual fairs, and we had anywhere from 800 to 1,000 students attending them. So, it was still serving a lot of people. We also did something virtual, which quite candidly works a lot better in person. Networking receptions. Generally, we call these industry days, although it's usually not the whole day, or we call them alumni student networking receptions. Now, in person, what it means is you show up, at a reception hall at AU that can hold, a few hundred people, maybe a bit less, and there's some free food, and you can chat with employers. And we also, by the way, do training sessions on how to handle yourself in a situation like this. Not everyone is comfortable just going up cold to someone they've never met before and talking to them about employment, about internships or jobs. We did virtual networking receptions. The reason why they don't work as well is because you can't really go up to people and chat them very well. It's more of a presentation style with Q&A, okay? Among the kinds of receptions we have done pre-pandemic and we also did virtually were, we did more than one on intelligence and criminal justice careers with relevant employers. CIA was there, other employers I can't quite remember. We did a very popular one on data analytics. And by the way, there is going to be, you are going to receive a weekly email starting, and you'll actually start receiving occasional emails with listing a lot of upcoming events, okay? You'll receive some of these in the summer. Starting in the fall semester, you'll receive them weekly. They don't come from me. And it's important that you pay attention to them, because from week to week, they will look somewhat similar. A few events will fall off that already happened, and some new events will come on. But it's the only way to keep track of, you know, if you're interested in a particular employer and that employer is coming to campus, whether it's virtual or in person, that's the only way really to find out about it, is these kinds of promotional, this kind of promotional content. So these Career Center weekly emails, they come from a colleague of mine named Darnice Samuel. I think it comes from her email account. And so, yeah, look for that is the best thing I can say. How common is it for master's students to hold full-time jobs? Does it say jobs? Let me see. Yeah, jobs while studying, someone asked. Okay, good question. People do it, okay? It's not rare, but it's not common. So what percentage of graduate students in the School of Public Affairs are working full-time jobs? My guess would be 20%, maybe 15%. It's hard to say. I mean, it's not, and the reason why it's hard for me to say is a lot of the people working full-time jobs were already working at them in DC before they entered the School of Public Affairs. They are getting a graduate degree to, you know, to accelerate their career prospects, right? And a lot of those people don't necessarily feel the need to see me, which is fine, doesn't hurt my feelings. So I don't necessarily know who a lot of these people are, because I don't necessarily see them and they don't necessarily attend events like this. It is possible to work full-time and be a full-time grad student, but remember that it means that for 2 years, the word fun goes out of your life pretty much, okay? What a lot of these people do, by the way, is they tend to take courses in the summer as well as in the spring and fall in order to be able to take a lighter course load, maybe 6 credit hours in the spring and in the fall, rather than 9 credit hours, all right? And that also has implications if you're receiving financial assistance. That has implications as to whether or not you can receive financial assistance in the summer. I can't answer those questions. You got to direct those to the School of Public Affairs. So yeah, there's those issues too. All right. So yes, it's possible. It requires a great deal of self-discipline. I mean, one of my children did it actually at the Kogod Business School in accounting, a very demanding program, and she made it through. Took her an extra semester. She had to delay it because she just had to, at one point, she just had to cut down a little bit. It was a lot of stress. But anyhow, that's my best advice. If you want to talk about that in more detail, I'm happy to talk to you about it individually in an appointment. Okay. Nothing else to say about career-focused events. Okay, I promised I was going to talk about upcoming career-related webinars this summer. The first one you will notice has already happened. That was one I did on advanced job and internship search strategies. Okay. There is another, the next one's coming up on June 22. All those times are Eastern, by the way. If you're not sitting in the East Coast, just remember to adjust the time frame for wherever you are. And by the way, anytime anybody at AU on staff or faculty or whatever refers to times, they're talking about Eastern time. Okay, that just make that assumption. Once you get on campus, obviously it's not going to be as big a deal. But anyway, June 22nd, there's one on resumes and cover letters. I'll tell you candidly, that's mostly for undergraduates. You can attend it if you want to, but it's fairly basic. Using social media in your search on June 29th, that's me. I'm going to be talking about that. And it's a fairly specialized subject. How to use Career Center resources. Again, mostly directed at undergraduates. You're finding out a lot about the Career Center this evening, so you may well not need to attend something like that. July 13, building professional relationships in a virtual environment. Interesting subject. A colleague of mine is doing that, and it could be worthwhile. Another colleague is doing one on federal resumes and using usajobs.gov. There's the last two. One of them is on interview prep, and another one's on salary negotiation. I am doing one of those, and I can't remember which one I'm doing, but they're both likely to be quite worthwhile in terms of learning, the ins and outs of salary negotiation, as well as some skills about how to prepare for various types of interviewing. Okay. Someone else asked a question here, so give me a second. One of you says, I'm seeking a full-time job while attending full-time grad school. Yeah, I understand that. I think if I haven't answered your question, Carolyn, tell me, and I'll talk about it more. But for the moment, I think I'm going to go on, and I just want to double check, make sure no one else has asked a question. So, oh, and by the way, there's a link at the bottom of the screen. I should have mentioned this at the outset. It's a bit.ly link to the events in Handshake. Okay. Anyhow, let's keep going. Now, I want to emphasize, these are not coming up. These are not real. These are dates that happened in the past, i.e. last spring. These were career skills, various kinds of career-related events that we did. This isn't all of them. This is just selected ones that I'm mentioning. When we did virtual fairs, most people have not had experience dealing with virtual job and internship fairs. So we did a webinar, a colleague of mine did, on how to prepare for dealing with a virtual internship and job fair. How to prepare your resumes for a virtual fair. Then we had something we called Resume Station, in which you could do drop-in appointments virtually, and we would do quick reviews of your resume. Okay. We had a job and internship on fair on February 3rd. And I'm not going to read all of these things, but anyway, you can see, building professional relationships using virtual tools. Handling interviews with artificial intelligence. That's one that I did and that I'll probably do again in the fall. It is becoming, I wouldn't say it's common, but it's becoming more common to encounter an employer when you're applying for a job, not an internship, where they say, okay, this is a link to an AI interview system. Click on it within the next 3 days and do the interview. And then what you find is you find yourself staring at a webcam with questions on the screen, and then it says, click start to record your answer. And you click start, and you tend to be really self-conscious because you realize you're only talking to algorithms. The recorded interview is not ever generally reviewed by human beings. What happens is algorithms judge the way you're talking, such as, for example, if you use a lot of filler words like and oh, and stuff like that. Also, it will evaluate how well you're making eye contact with the webcam, how much you're smiling, and how much you're looking away in other directions. Things you might do that might seem nervous, that might indicate you're nervous. Your use of jargon that is relevant to the job you're applying for, things like that. Frankly, it's a little bit creepy, but it's coming more and more. It's used in the for-profit sector. It's being used by federal contractors in DC. It's being used a little bit by government agencies, but not a lot yet. And it's even being used by some large nonprofits in the DC area. So this may be something. I've got a fact sheet on it in Canvas, and you may want to attend the webinar, or there'll be a recording of it. Particularly if you are about to confront an AI interview system. Very different than being interviewed by a human being, not to say the least. Other sessions, utilizing LinkedIn. A colleague of mine does that. It's very, very useful. And you see some repetition from the ones that are being offered this summer. The ones in yellow are ones that I did last spring, by the way. And yeah, that's that. There's not much else I'm going to say about this. So this is an example of the kind of fuller career skills webinars that we did during an entire semester. Okay. Career-related events. Okay, this is different from career skills. And this is just some of them. So for example, there was a Foreign Service information session in January. The International Development Finance Corporation, which is a federal agency, did an information session. Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, a very big employer. A number of AU alumni are working there, actually. Someone from NSA did a presentation. There was a networking event involving Africa-related issues, another one involving Latin American-related employers. The U.S. Agency for International Development did a session on careers there. We did a whole employer, networking reception, so to speak, virtual, on employers working in sustainability, on employers who are government contractors, and on data analytics, a whole session on data analytics, a whole networking reception, which was virtual. Okay, so this is just some of the stuff that was offered. So as you can see, there's a lot going on, and taking advantage of this, particularly when you're in a situation when you're looking to when you're trying to build a career, possibly in the DC area, or in any case, get a lot better informed about your career path. There's a lot of stuff available. This is a very robust service that we provide at the AU Career Center, not just me, but others too. Any other questions at the moment? No, I don't see any. I mentioned I was going to talk about the self-assessment process. Again, this is a document that you would download from the Canvas site. If you can't find it, I'll send it to you directly. Don't worry about that. The objective of this process is to empower you and position you for maximum impact in the job market. Either it could be pre-graduation or it could be post-graduation. It involves completing a detailed self-assessment, including a SWOT analysis. Those of you who have experience with strategic planning know that that means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that you candidly talk about for yourself with regard to the job market. There then can be individual follow-up coaching. You commit to action steps. What is an action step? I'm going to attend some of these career webinars. I'm going to, or it could be more ambitious, like I'm going to try to get a job with a particular employer or an internship with a particular employer. You can also, and by the way, what you would do is you'd fill out this form, then we would do a 60-minute session where I would kind of critique it, okay? And we would toss ideas back and forth. But I'm not going to be, one of your parents. I'm not going to be checking to see that you actually did everything you committed to do. You can come back to me for a follow-up. Not many people tend to do that. Most people are adults, and they're all adults actually. It's grad students, and they kind of monitor themselves and feel that they've got something out of it. So this is available. If you wanted to do it sooner because you don't have access to Canvas now, I can send it to you. And again, I'll give you my email address in a moment. I mentioned I'm the lead advisor for all EU students, all EU grad students. We've for presidential management fellowships. There are usually 5,000, maybe 6,000 candidates nationwide. It narrows to 350 or so these days. Finalists. A finalist is not a fellow. When you become a finalist, which you would get after taking a pretty rigorous assessment test, it's not a knowledge test. It's partly a psychological test. It's partly an IQ test. It's also a writing test. You're only eligible, now to give you an example, the people who are eligible to take this test this coming October, which is when they always offer it, are people who are graduating no later than August of 2022, okay? And that's not gonna be all of you, I'm pretty sure. All right, that's gonna be people who came to AU a year earlier than you. the vast bulk of, or at least just about all of you, unless you're stretching out your program because you're going to school part-time, if you're graduating in May or August of 2023, then you would be taking the Presidential Management Fellow assessment and you wanted to be a candidate, you would take the assessment in October. It's a 3.5-hour test. I've got a whole Canvas site with prep content about how to prepare for the test. I also do a webinar that's about 2 hours long with a lot of advice on how to prep. And I do the same webinar repeatedly because I find that most candidates can't make just one date. I have to offer it over several dates, over several weeks. This all would become available in mid-July of, in your case, 2022. Okay, a little more than a year from now, and that's how it works. You learn a lot of the content, a lot about preparation for the test from the webinar and from the Canvas site. There are a lot of other opportunities to try to qualify for what are almost entirely postgraduate fellowships and scholar programs. There is an AU Office of Merit Awards, which is part of the Career Center, and they offer coaching to be a Fulbright Clinton Fellow or a Bourne Scholar. Critical Language Scholar, pretty interesting program in which if you can qualify with the State Department, they will send you somewhere for, depending on what language you're studying, for 4 months, total immersion. Okay, you don't spend any time talking to other Americans or anybody else speaking English for that matter. You don't necessarily come out fully fluent if you're studying, say, Mandarin. That's going to be pretty difficult in 4 months. And in fact, there's a lot more to it than that. I don't want to go into all of it now, but if this appeals to you, a lot of grad students tend to do this right after they've received their master's degree, because it does require you to be away for 4 months. And I mean, far away, right? The program, I think, was suspended during the pandemic, but my understanding is it's going to come back into play maybe this summer and definitely by next summer, okay? And there are a number of other fellowship and scholar programs that the Office of Merit Awards, but again, Office of Merit Awards is not a substitute for financial aid, and the vast bulk of their coaching is for postgraduate scholar and fellow programs, right? But AU does very well in this competition because that office does extremely well. I actually am involved in an assisting capacity with coaching people in a lot of these fellow and scholar programs, aside from the lead role I play in presidential management fellow programs. Going to take a look to see if there's any questions. I don't see any. Okay, so about a couple of things I want to cover now, which are really a fast look at things you need to be thinking about. If you're an MS, for this slide, if you're an MS data analytics student, you don't really need to pay too much attention to this. I do want to say that data analytic software skills are really important virtually no matter what degree program you're in. And to enhancing your data analytics skill will make you a far more employable, attractive candidate for employment. That particularly means if you've not had any exposure to data analytics, learning Stata, which you will get exposed to in the research methods course that most of you have to take, but you may want to do more. And the way you do that primarily is with something called the AU Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning, which offers for enrolled students free additional training in a lot of this stuff. ArcGIS, which is geospatial analytical software that basically it's data analysis using maps and imagery from drones and satellites. Tableau, which is the main software used for creating data visualization. Qualtrics, which is the main software used in survey research, particularly interesting if you're a political science student, for example. I'm not going to talk about all these things. If you're confused about data analytics and you want to know what it is you should be starting to get to do, that's another kind of advising appointment that I do. All right. We talk about what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, and what data analytics skills would be useful for you to pick up. But this is all, the instruction is free, but it's all in addition to your course load, okay? So this is taking on more stuff. Depending on what else you're trying to do, learning something about social media, and I don't just mean having a Twitter account, I mean understanding how social media is professionally managed, how the analytics work, that can be pretty useful for people in, for example, political communication, if you're getting a degree in political communication, and potentially a number of other fields. For example, I know, because I spent much of my life abroad, every US embassy has a specialist in social media who is, and usually more than one, who are monitoring social media in that country to see what the trends are, what people are saying about the US and American policies, etc. And by the way, national security intelligence agencies obviously monitor social media pretty closely, globally. Internship search tools. This is really just a tip of the iceberg of the advanced job search webinar that I do. LinkedIn is the best major job and internship search engine in terms of finding stuff in a user-friendly way. And also, of course, as I'm sure you all know, it's really important to build a strong online profile on LinkedIn. Indeed.com is good, it's not great. LinkedIn is great, Indeed.com is good. It's a good resource. Actually, it's not, I should have changed this slide. It's not complicated to use anymore. They've made it a lot easier to use. They've changed their interface, and it's not that complicated. I don't want to scare you away from it. People do use Twitter to find jobs and internships by following certain employers or certain people. The issue with Twitter is if you follow too much stuff, then you're overwhelmed, and then you've got this constant stream of stuff coming through, and you're just going to miss a lot of it. Okay, so one of the things I talk about in the webinar I have upcoming on using social media for job searching is how to use Twitter in a smart way to advance your career. Okay, there's also something called idealist.org, which you may or may not have heard of. They only post nonprofit jobs and internships. It's not very good at all for internship searching, but it's fairly good for searching for nonprofit jobs, particularly in the DC area. Okay, so that's idealist.org, and it's all of this stuff obviously is free access. When you are applying for jobs, particularly in the DC area, it's probably true anywhere, speed of response is essential. First of all, you need to be sure that you have set up your search for an internship or job so that if at all possible, you are seeing jobs and internships that you want to apply to within 24 hours, maximum 48 hours of the time they actually come online. Then when you see something you want to apply for, you are, if at all possible, dropping everything and applying right there and then. And if not possible, doing it the same day and not going to sleep that night without applying. Because as I say, a lot of employers will receive 100 applicants for a well-regarded paid internship or a fairly decent job. Within 48 hours, they will get 100 applicants. And here's the deal. If you're the 125th applicant to apply, you probably won't get your email open. That's just a fact of life. That's why speed of response is so important. And as I say here, high quality internships are similarly competitive, especially when they are paid. You should think about setting up email alerts, which will help you see new postings quickly. And you've got to apply immediately, okay? And again, if you got questions, jump in, but I'm gonna, oops, I think I skipped a page there. No, I didn't skip a page, sorry. Very short prep on interviewing, which I can do a lot more of if you've got them, if you need to do a mock interview. By the way, I only do mock interviews for real interviews. I don't do hypothetical mock interviews, okay? So you've got to really have an internship or a job interview coming up. There are 5 questions that are asked about 90% of the time in first interviews. Why do you want to work for us? Why are you interested in this specific job or this internship? Well, where do you think you're going to be in 3 years or 5 years? Or where do you hope to be when you graduate? Something like that. Okay. What are your strengths for this position? And what do you think your most significant weakness might be? You've got to be prepared for those questions. Your answers to those should be ready so that basically you're hitting a home run with every answer to those questions because you know they're coming. Okay. Then there is a question that, from the feedback I get, is asked about 50% of the time. And if it is asked, it is the first question. And it's, so tell me about yourself, right? And there's a certain way that kind of question has to be handled. I'm not going to go into it here, but this is the kind of prep I do when you've got an interview or for an internship or job coming up. Okay, so that's interview prep. Cover letters. Again, this is just really headline stuff about cover letters. Get right to the point. Don't start out by talking about how committed you are to the mission of a particular employer, et cetera, et cetera. The first paragraph should be an answer to this question. What are the 3 or 4 most important qualities I have that this employer wants based upon this job posting or internship posting that I'm looking at? What are the 3 or 4 most important qualities? That's what you get at in the first paragraph. Don't start talking about, I've admired Amnesty International for many years and it would be such an honor to blah, 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 blah. That's not going to help you. You want to start out right from the bat by marketing yourself from the first words of the first sentence of the cover letter. You also want to be emphasizing 3 things that all employers value: experience multitasking, experience working under deadline pressure, and experience working collaboratively in a team environment. Okay. By the way, you've got to start using a DC address. If you want a job or an internship in DC, you've got to have that on your resume and on your cover letter right now. Do not send out, if you've been applying for jobs and internships without a DC address, you're using an address in some other city that is not and by the way, when I say DC, I should explain, I'm not talking about District of Columbia specifically. I'm talking about the district and the Maryland suburbs and the Virginia suburbs. Okay. So DC area address, I should have written there. But, if you're living in Chicago and you're going to be moving here for grad school, do not use the Chicago address. My experience is, and it's a very sad one really, is that, I will have recent alumni make appointments with me 4 months, 6 months after they've graduated. And they say, I've applied for 50 jobs and I haven't gotten 1 interview, or I got 2 interviews. And then I look at their resume and it's got an address on it that is not in the DC area. And then when I tell them they got to use a DC address, they start doing that. And oftentimes within a week or 2, they start getting interviews all of a sudden. Employers in this area, and by the way, this is true of every major city: New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, et cetera. Employers in major cities tend to want to hire local people, and they don't want the hassle of people from out of town unless you have a highly specific skill that is in great demand and they need to recruit outside of a local area. And they will know what those jobs are. Okay. I mean, I got to a certain point in my career where I was able to be competitive in applying for jobs in other parts of the world, and I did land them because I had some highly specific skills. But that was, 12 years or so into my career from grad school. So at this point in your life, unless you've got a highly specific skill, and if you're not sure exactly what that is, that's another thing we could talk about in an appointment. But you've got to use a DC address, okay? And if you don't have a DC address right now, use a friend or family address in this area. And if you don't have friend or family in this area, just use AU's address. It's 4400 Massachusetts Avenue, Washington, D.C. 4400 Massachusetts Avenue, Washington, D.C. I don't know what the postal code is, but don't worry about that. No one will ever send you snail mail at 4400 Massachusetts Avenue, by the way. In fact, they're not going to send you snail mail anyway. They're going to phone you or they're going to send you an email. That's what's going to happen if they're interested in interviewing you and or hiring you ultimately. okay? But get that DC address on your resume and on your cover letter. Federal internships, quickly. The Pathways internship program is a major reform of federal internships that was done by Obama about 10 years ago. They're all paid. They tend to be career focused, but they might be focused on careers that you're not trying to pursue. So it depends. There is some potential to convert to permanent employment with Pathways, but don't count on it. It tends to be no more than 5 to 10% of Pathways interns convert into permanent employment in the agency where they're working. The big advantage of Pathways internships is that if you are not a military veteran, you're generally not competing against military veterans. The issue with federal jobs, not internships now, is that if you're not a military veteran, you are competing against veterans, and they get a very significant preference in hiring. Now, it doesn't mean it's impossible to get a federal job if you're not a veteran, but it does mean that it's more of a challenge, okay? There are some federal agencies that offer unpaid internships. The State Department has a very popular one, in fact, but it's unpaid. Why is it unpaid? As somebody from the State Department told me, well, because we don't need to pay. People still, thousands of people still applied for it. So that's their attitude about it, okay? There are places like the Export-Import Bank, the Development Finance Corporation, the International Trade Administration. Those are several I can think of that are federal agencies that don't pay their interns. But the internships are pretty good. So it depends on, the state of your finances and whether you're interested in those agencies. So let's keep going. Then there is the federal sector in general, all right? And I'm talking about both the federal government and federal contractors, okay? Most federal jobs have to be posted on USA Jobs. That doesn't necessarily apply to certain, particularly intelligence agencies. Generally, you apply to them directly and not via USA Jobs. And yeah, not much else to say about that. Government contractors. This is a huge employment sector in DC, in the DC area. The hiring of people for federal contractors closely follows detailed specifications that are demanded by the government agency that's doing the contracting, okay? Contractors, unlike the federal government, federal contractors do hire a lot of current and former interns. And also their hiring is done, generally speaking, pretty openly and transparently. And working for a contractor for 3-4 years can often be a backdoor to actually getting directly into the agency that you've been working for as a contractor, okay? Sometimes they require writing or editing tests, sometimes psychological profiles. And in particular, a lot of them are especially interested in you having pretty solid Excel skills. And yeah, I'm just gonna keep going. Whoops, I skipped a page, sorry. Corporate sector. I'm talking about the real private sector now, not government contractors. What is this composed of in DC? Lobbying and government relations firms, they are for profit. Communication firms, PR firms. Management trading, this is when you're going into a real corporation, like say Marriott Corporation, which happens to be headquartered in Bethesda, Maryland, not very close to where I'm sitting right now. And for big corporations, if you want to go to work for General Electric, okay, or some big technology company, a lot of times they will want you to start either as a management trainee or in marketing and sales or in human resources or some aspect of recruitment. It depends. For most of you, however, I think you're more likely to be interested in lobbying, government relations firms, communication related firms. A lot of these employers will post jobs on their own job boards and may not post them in places like LinkedIn, okay? And quantitative skills, again, the data analytics skills that I mentioned before can be important for these kinds of positions. The nonprofit sector is another huge part of the job market in DC. And by the way, one thing I almost neglected to mention is overall, the job market for SPA related or relevant careers in DC never went down during the pandemic. Okay, I lived through it. I followed it extremely closely because of the Twitter account I maintain. It never dropped. And in fact, in the last 3 months or so, the SPA relevant job market in the DC area has been extremely robust, has really taken off. It was good before, and now it's very good. Okay, the internship market is at this point in time roughly at a level it was at pre-pandemic. So you shouldn't enter this, internship or job market thinking, oh boy, there's really no jobs or internships. It's going to be really hard. You should be cautiously optimistic. Not that we're confident, but cautiously optimistic. Okay. With the nonprofit sector, you need to think about, well, where do I want to work in the nonprofit sector? Environment, human rights, children's rights, women's issues, anti-poverty, etc. What kind of function do I want to do? Do I want to be a researcher, analyst, communications? Do I want to be doing project coordination, project management, etc.? And nonprofit organizations are more likely than most employers to cut corners when they post jobs, meaning they might be interviewing people within 4 or 5 days after they've posted a job if they have enough applicants, which they usually do if they're well known enough. So important to respond quickly. Idealist.org, as I mentioned before, the Twitter account, LinkedIn, Indeed, and Handshake, as well as directly on the employer sites themselves, are places to look for nonprofit jobs. I think there've been some questions. Oops, I hope I haven't felt. Let's see. Oh yeah, the place where you can get extra training in data analytics, it's the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning, CTRL. Okay. Does completion of one of the analytics courses result in a certification? Learning the data analytics and getting certified in the data analytics are often two different things. And generally, certifications require a much higher level of expertise in the software. So that's something you're going to have to investigate and also talk to professors about, particularly professors teaching research methods courses who will really know about these issues is it worth it for me? Is there such a thing as a certification in Stata? I actually haven't heard of it personally. So maybe there is such a thing. Is it worth it for me to do that? There is a certification you can get in Excel that is often a pretty good thing to be listing on your resume. I know. And, so play it, not by ear, but one by one in terms of various types of software that you might be interested in. Another question. What if you won't have a DC address until August? As I said, use 4400 American University's address, 4400 Massachusetts Avenue, Washington, DC. Okay. What should you do if you don't have an address? Okay, that's the same question. That's my answer. All right. I don't see any other questions at the moment. Okay. So let's go for the next slide. Lobbying and consulting, just a little bit on this. There's several different kinds. Political consulting in particular, these firms are looking for past political and volunteering internships, work you've done on campaigns, possibly where you come from, or having done work with the college Democrats or college Republicans. In case you didn't get the memo, politics is really polarized these days. It's virtually impossible to sell yourself as somebody who is bipartisan if you're trying to get a job with a political consulting firm. They're going to want to know, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? Okay. And those political consulting firms almost never work both sides of the fence. It's almost impossible. I mean, think about, the state of politics in this country right now. So you're either one or the other. All right. Management consulting. There are opportunities with small firms. It requires some research to figure out who these firms are. There are big firms, McKinsey and Bain Consulting and Deloitte and Grant Thornton, etc. I have a list of them on Canvas. The kind of interviewing you would have to do for these firms is generally specialized. And again, I have fact sheets on how to handle behavioral interviewing, how to handle case interviewing. You can go into something, I guess I haven't mentioned it yet, or I did actually. On Handshake, there's something called Big Interview, okay? You click on resources on the main menu, and you will see Big Interview. You go there and you say, I want to do a case interview. And you will be asked questions similar to the kind of questions that a management consulting firm would ask you. You would record your answers and you'd be critiquing yourself. It's also possible to get a critique, an algorithmic critique, if you will, from Big Interview. So public relations firms, needless to say, they look for very strong writing and editing skills. And by the way, these public relations firms tend to be the firms that do corporate social responsibility consulting for corporations. So if you're interested in corporate social responsibility, public relations is pretty much the way to go. And they're also going to be looking to see if you've got digital and social media skills. That is management and analytic skills, not just that you had your own Twitter account for the last 8 years or whatever. And they're going to be assessing in interviews how good you are as a people person, how sociable you are. I've at times had public relations firms working for me when I was, working for various employers. And I will tell you that the really good ones, the people I worked with, from the very junior people who were recent college graduates up to the more senior people, were all extraordinarily social people and really good at, those kinds of professional relationships, sometimes in highly pressured settings. Okay. Applicant tracking systems. This is when an employer, pretty much only for jobs, not internships, tells you upload your resume and cover letter into a database rather than sending an email. Okay. And what happens with that is the first level of screening as to whether or not you're going to get an interview is then done by software, not by people. And it's mostly, as I say here in the third bullet point, a quantitative exercise. You're trying to use keywords that come out of the job description so that the algorithms will start giving you a higher score, okay? And when you get a high enough score, then you might get an interview. And remember that when you're uploading your resume, I wouldn't worry about using keywords in a cover letter. Generally, they don't scan cover letters. But the resume they do scan quite carefully in these kinds of applicant tracking systems. And the object is that you're uploading your resume. The object is to get to the point where you're then going to be having your content read by a human and then actually interviewed with a human being. Okay. There is a detailed suite of 3 fact sheets on the campus site on applicant tracking systems. Networking, I'm not going to say very much about this other than, yes, it's important. DC will be opening up in the fall to some degree. So it hopefully is going to be possible for you, if you've got time, if you're not working full-time jobs or internships, to at times go downtown. And that means getting off, not just campus, but getting downtown and going to, places, Women in International Security, which is a real organization. There's a couple of think tanks. There's several think tanks actually that do an ongoing series of webinars and other kinds of, they're doing webinars now. They're hopefully will be doing in-person events where you can actually mingle with people. Places like the Center for Strategic International Studies, the Brookings Institution, the Carnegie Endowment, those are the only ones that come to mind at the moment. But anyway, and I've got a whole list of those think tanks, by the way, on that list of employers that I mentioned. So these are just some of the places to think about, trying to network with. So finally, advising appointments are available for you. Hopefully you'll be able to make the reservation on the Handshake system, which I would prefer if you know how to use it, if you have access to it. Well, you all have access to it. Whether you know how to use it is a different issue right now. The advantage for you in making an appointment with me on Handshake is that you'll be able to see all my upcoming availability, as opposed to me exchanging emails with you saying, okay, how about 2 o'clock on Thursday? No, well, how about 3 o'clock on Friday? Or, etc. So you can see everything that's available for me over the next several weeks and make the appointment that's most convenient for you. Right now, it is Zoom only, okay? I will be on campus 2 days a week. I don't know which days those are going to be yet, starting in the middle of August, sometime around August 16th or so. And when you make a Handshake appointment that is a Zoom appointment, your appointment information will have a Zoom link. That is the link that you will click on at the time of the appointment, okay? If you come to see me on campus, I will either be on, most of the time I'm going to be on the 5th floor of Butler Pavilion, which is across the street from the basketball arena, and that probably means nothing to most of you right now. But it's the only thing on the 5th floor except for a parking garage. So if you're in the parking garage, you know you're not in the Career Center. Sometimes I am going to be in a suite of offices in room 106C on the 1st floor of the Kerwin School of Public Affairs building, right near the entrance to the building, actually. And so remember to look for those AU Career Center emails announcing various events coming up, as I mentioned. There is my address, right? robert.sangeorge@american.edu, okay? Let me see if there are other final questions. Can you be applying for jobs in the fall, even if you aren't in DC? The answer is yes, and particularly because employers right now are pretty much just doing Zoom interviews, like Zoom or Skype or whatever they're using, Adobe Connect, whatever. So even if you're not in DC, you could be doing interviews. Now, if you apply for it, let's say you got really lucky and you applied for a job next week and they called you the following week, and then for an interview, and you did an interview, and one of the things they said is, well, how soon can you be available? What they don't want to hear is, well, I'll be in DC, in late August. You need to be thinking about how you can make yourself maximally available if you're not here and you're applying for certain jobs or internships in DC. However, it may be possible, of course, to start working remotely. And in fact, I would say that with most employers right now, it's more likely you're going to start remotely than start in person. But you have to be ready and willing and able to start in person. And by the way, employers, I have read recently, employers can require you to be vaccinated. So good idea to get vaccinated, well, obviously for public health reasons, but just so that you can say with a straight face to an employer, oh yes, I've been vaccinated. Okay, important advice. I do not see any other questions. So I'm going to sign off here. If you have other things, if you have questions you want to ask on email that you didn't want to ask in front of everyone else, send me an email. If you've got a really long question, what I will probably do is send you a reply that says, please make an appointment, okay? Because I don't do memos. I will respond to short inquiries on email, and longer inquiries need to have discussions. So enjoyed talking to all of you, and good luck with all this. And I look forward to actually seeing a lot of you in person come the fall. So good night and good luck.